In this section, we're going to talk about the types of insurance for individuals and businesses. As I said before, we're just going to kind of talk about the different types of insurance that's available. We're not going to go really deep in any specific one of these. First up, life insurance. Life insurance provides for your family or your named beneficiary upon your death. The owner of the policy has the power to name the beneficiary of the insurance proceeds. The owner of the policy could change that beneficiary. If no beneficiary is named, the proceeds are going to be paid to the insured's estate, and then they'll be distributed per will, or if there is no will, per state intestacy laws. Parties to a life insurance policy include the insurance company, the owner of the policy, that's the one who contracts with the insurance company and pays the premium. The insured is the person whose life is insured. This is generally the owner, but as you will see later, this is not always the case. And the beneficiary, the one who is to receive the proceeds when the insured dies. The common types of life insurance include term insurance, whole life insurance, universal life insurance, and an annuity. Term insurance, this is the simplest and the cheapest form of life insurance. It provides coverage only during the term of the policy and pays only on the insured's death. Terms can be for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years, whatever that term is set. The insured must die during the term. This is the best choice for someone who simply wants to protect his or her family by replacing their income if he or she dies before retirement. Whole life insurance is designed to cover the insured for his or her entire life. A portion of the premium pays for the insurance and the remainder goes into savings. The savings portion is what we call the cash value. The company pays dividends on this cash value. Typically after some years, the dividends are large enough to cover the premium so that the owner does not have to pay anymore. The owner can borrow against the cash value. If the owner ultimately cancels the policy, the company will pay him the policy's cash value. The premium generally stays constant over the life of the policy upon its purchase date. Universal life insurance, it's kind of a combination of the term and the whole life insurance policy. They are more complex, there's higher fees involved. They have a death benefit component like the term life insurance. So upon your death, there's a payment to beneficiaries. There's also a value savings component like the whole life insurance, allowing for someone to have life insurance throughout their life. There's some flexibility in the premium payments and the death benefits allow for some adjustments. Sometimes these policies are referred as the flexible premium adjustable life insurance. But like I said, they become more complex and there's higher fees involved. And then there's the annuity. I kind of personally don't like to plop this in the life insurance. For me, in my head, I think of this as a financial product for like retirement. It's kind of a reverse life insurance. This provides payment to a beneficiary during his or her lifetime. In a basic annuity contract, the owner makes a lump sum payment or a series of payments to an insurance company in return for a fixed annual income for the rest of her or his life, no matter how long they live. If they die tomorrow, the company makes money. If they live to be 95, the company loses money. But whatever happens, the person knows that they will have income until the day they die. So like I said, it's kind of like a retirement plan. So what's the insurable interest in a life insurance policy? Well, everyone has an insurable interest in their own life, and they can name whoever they want to benefit from their death. But you may be able to have an insurable interest in somebody else. The law allows for that, but it is restricted, and it's restricted to children and spouse. They have an insurable interest either in a spouse or a parent. So a parent has an insurable interest in a child, and vice versa, child to parent. But children can't enter into insurance contracts because they're under the age of 18. Then they become an adult. And I guess you can insure your parent But it's limited, obviously, to immediate family members, but not siblings. You can't take an insurance policy on your sibling. What's common? A wife taking out an insurance policy on their husband, which they can do without consent, and vice versa. The insurable interest must exist when the policy is taken out. So, for instance, married and a spouse takes an insurable interest out on their spouse. Now they're divorced. As long as the ex is still making policy payments, when the other spouse dies, they can still collect on the policy. You could not take out a policy on your neighbor or your best friend. Changing the beneficiary, I already said that you can change your beneficiary, but I want to make a note here. You must reserve the right to change the beneficiaries. And I will say most of the policies that require a beneficiary, I mean, it's obvious if it's your car insurance policy, then you are the beneficiary. But talking about life insurance specifically in this section, you have to name who your beneficiary is. And like I said, most policies now allow for change. There's language in there that allows for the change, but you should look for it if you have a life insurance policy or are thinking about getting one, about this reservation, because if there's language that's required and you name someone and you don't reserve the right, that person is going to be the beneficiary. Health insurance is another individualized form of insurance. It covers the cost of hospitalization, visits to the doctor's office, prescription medications. The most useful policy, the one that we should all get, are those that cover 100% of the costs, especially costs of being hospitalized. But as it exists today, the best is 100% of the costs of being hospitalized, 80% of the charges for medicines and doctor services. Usually the policy will contain a deductible amount. The insurer will not make payments until after the deductible amount has been reached. We'll talk more a little bit about deductibles after we get through a few more insurances. Other coverage I'd like to lump under health insurance, dental insurance, and eyeglass coverage. Those are both also insurances that are available. Disability insurance. A disability policy pays a certain percentage of an employee's wages or a fixed sum, weekly or monthly, if the employee becomes unable to work through illness or accident. That's the point of disability insurance. Homeowners insurance. This type of policy provides insurance for damages or losses due to fire, theft, or other named perils to your home that you own. No policy routinely covers them all. And of course, the insurance company does a risk assessment to complete what type of risks are involved with your specific home. A basic homeowner's policy covers damage resulting from fire, lightning, windstorm, and hail, explosions, riots, civil commotion, vandalism, and theft. But we're going to talk about some other broader components of this. So a broader homeowner's policy, comprehensive policy, would also include collapse of buildings, damage to heating systems, discharge from plumbing, heating or air conditioning, accidental injury from electronic appliances. But even so, policies do not usually cover damage from flooding, earthquakes, or war separate issues. You need a separate policy for flooding and earthquakes, especially if you are in areas prone to that, and they are steep premiums. And I'm going to note here, mortgage companies, if you have taken a loan to buy your house, that lender will hold a mortgage against your house. It's in the security interest. We're going to get into mortgages a little later. But they're usually going to require a homeowner's policy, and they are also going to want a designation of whether or not your home sits in what's called a flood zone. And if it is, they're going to require the purchase of flood insurance in addition to that property insurance or the homeowner's insurance. Automobile insurance is another type of individual insurance. A typical automobile policy covers liability for bodily injury and property damages, medical payments, damage to or loss of the car itself, and also attorney's fees in the event that there is a lawsuit due to an accident. All states but New Hampshire and Virginia require owners of automobiles to have insurance. In New York, you can be issued a traffic citation and you can lose your license for 1 year if you operate a vehicle without insurance. Collision, liability, and medical provisions are all in a basic coverage policy. Usually a clause for comprehensive coverage is needed for covering things or risks of loss or damage as a result of something like a theft or vandalism, storms, falling objects, riots, weather such as hail. Those are going to require separate coverage. Uninsured motorist coverage is usually part of a policy now. These kind of cover hit and run accidents, someone who is at fault but doesn't have insurance. That's where this uninsured motorist coverage would play a part. We also see no fault coverage now. This is where we don't require, or we insurance companies don't require a fault designation, because what would happen is trying to decide who is at fault. That was your fault. No, it was your fault. And then you have to go to court for a designation of fault in order to figure out which insurance pays. Now we have this no fault coverage. We don't need a designation for fault, and insurance companies will just pay out. If you have a no fault coverage, you can just get your car fixed under that component. So the key here is recovery of damages in an accident no longer depends on who's at fault of who caused it. Personal liability insurance. There are many types of risks that are not covered in other policies. Today, anyone can be sued for anything, right? How about a slip on your walk? You might say, hey, my homeowners insurance covers that. Only if you have a personal liability clause in that insurance, which is where we see somebody gets hurt on your property. Harsh and untrue words, right? Spoken in anger, that's a defamation kind of claim, potentially, especially if it's false. Accident on a ball field. How about your dog bites somebody, right? Some insurance companies will cover, they'll ask you in your application if you own a dog, and if you say yes, you got to say what breed. If you say a Labrador Retriever or a Golden Retriever, you're probably not going to get any hassle with that. But if you say you got a Pit Bull or a Doberman or some other dog that has aggressive tendencies, you might see that reflected in your policy. Types of interesting personal liability insurance coverage. Taylor Swift has a $40 million policy on her legs, Bruce Springsteen on his vocal cords, Keith Richards on his middle finger, Jennifer Lopez on her buttocks, Julia Roberts on her teeth. So you can get personal liability insurance on just about anything. Other types of individual insurances include personal articles floater. Someone can get insurance for specific valuable items. If you own jewelry or art collection or coin collection, or maybe just one piece of valuable art, you can get that insured. Renter's insurance. This is insurance that covers loss and damage to possessions of a home or apartment someone rents. It also does provide for personal liability coverage for accidents that happen within that space or on that property that they're renting. Title insurance. Owners of real property can purchase this, and it ensures that they have clear title to the property. I guess it doesn't ensure that you have clear title to the property, but you are protected in the event that, let's say your neighbor says, hey, you know this tract of land over here, that's mine. And you say, oh no, that's mine, it's written in my deed. Well, I got a survey done. This is where you might use your title insurance for a lawsuit against, or to protect against being sued by your neighbor, so you don't pay those expenses, and in the event you lose that piece of property, you can be paid its value. Mortgages companies will require that a homeowner purchase title insurance as long as there's a mortgage on the property. It protects that mortgage company's interest. Let's talk about the common types of insurance that's available for businesses. Workers' compensation insurance. States require businesses to carry it. It covers employees who are injured at work while working within the scope of their employment. So if somebody is working in a factory, doing their job, and something happens with the equipment and they are injured, they're entitled to make a claim for workers' compensation. So an injured worker submits a claim to the appropriate workers' compensation court or administrative agency, and that agency determines the payment of loss. And this is very state specific. It's very statutory. The workers' compensation laws themselves actually express what type of payment is due when there is a specific type of loss. So if, let's say, somebody lost a finger, that's specifically stated. If somebody loses a finger, they get X amount of dollars. So it's very specific in the statutory language. In most cases, the injured employee cannot sue his or her employer for liability because of this award. This is the exclusive remedy, and it protects both parties, really. If somebody's injured at work, it's done within the scope of their employment, they're entitled to payment. So if an employee sued their employer, there was no, let's say there's no workers' compensation, they would have to sue. And then they would have to say somebody was negligent. And then you'd have to prove that somebody was negligent. Here it's, hey, I was injured at work. I was working within the scope of my employment. I'm entitled to be compensated. Other insurances for business, well, automobile insurance. If your company or business has drivers, requires driving, you need coverage. If you specifically have vehicles that are used, those vehicles need to be covered. If a driver is using their own vehicle but covered under your insurance, you have to name those approved drivers. I want to take a side note here on automobile insurance. I've been reading a lot lately on Uber drivers. If you're an Uber driver, you know how it works. You sign up with Uber, you go through their process, you get approved. What's interesting is that most people who do that use their own private insurance. You're driving your car, you got your own personal car insurance, and now you're picking up people and taking them to destinations, and there's kind of been a little bit of an outcry of that. What happens in an accident? Who pays? You're not driving personally, you're doing this to make money. Is this a business? So some states, I think New York is on board with this, I don't think anything has been approved, but requiring Uber drivers to have the same kind of insurance as cab drivers or limo drivers, which is pretty expensive. So then is it worth being an Uber driver? So this is kind of an issue that's currently being discussed. Another form of business insurance, property insurance. I'm not going to go through that. That's the same as what we talked about with homeowners insurance. Malpractice insurance for professionals. So this insures against liability resulting from negligent practice of a profession. Attorneys, accountants, doctors, dentists, engineers, architects, generally people with license. They need some sort of professional malpractice. Key employees coverage. An employer has an insurable interest on their key employees and partners. Life insurance is purchased and paid for by a business that insures against death of owners and other key employees of that business. A lot of times, though, the proceeds are used to pay the deceased beneficiaries for the deceased interest in the business, which then reverting the interest to the other owners of the business. So if somebody who has like partners, let's say we got 4 partners, and one of those partners dies, generally if there's no agreement saying otherwise, that partner's interest becomes the heirs. So then an heir would step in, and that might not be what the partnership wants. So that's what they use the life insurance for, to pay out that interest so then they can operate as, well, then three. Directors and officers insurance. This is insurance that protects directors and officers of a corporation from liability for actions taken on behalf of the corporation. And I will say that most directors and officers are protected by what we call the business judgment rule, where courts will not find liability if they were acting in good faith and making good business decisions. Nobody can predict what can happen as a result of a decision. So if somebody makes a decision and it ends up costing the corporation, this is where insurance may help in that situation. Unexpected interruption. Depending on the size of the business and its vulnerability to losses resulting from damage to essential operating equipment or other property, a company may wish to purchase insurance that will cover loss of earnings if the business operations are interrupted in some way by a strike, by a loss of power, by a loss of raw material supply, and so on, i.e. COVID, right? The pandemic, businesses were forced to shut down. If businesses had business interruption insurance, they were covered, or they can get a payment from the insurance company depending on, what the payout amount is. Some more insurance that are common to business: product liability. If a company is putting out a product, this is insurance that protects sellers and manufacturers against injuries caused by defective products. Liability insurance, there's a host of risks that businesses could face. So any further liability insurance that's needed specific to a business. Cyber insurance is out there now. Insurance that protects companies from losses and liability to customers caused by cyber attacks. This is a very expensive type of insurance, but if a company is using folks' credit cards, they have to protect against that, and if there's a breach and a customer suffers some damages as a result, they can be sued. My last topic here in types of insurance is umbrella insurance, and I put it last because individuals can obtain this insurance as well as businesses. This is additional insurance that provides coverage in excess of the basic policy limits of other insurance policies. So this is over and above. So under most auto and property insurance policies, there's a policy limit to a certain dollar amount. If an insured wants to increase their liability coverage beyond those limits, this is what they purchase: an umbrella insurance policy. The payment of the proceeds on this policy are only paid after the original policy limits are exhausted. So before this type of insurance is obtained, the insured will be required to purchase that basic first coverage. You can't just jump to umbrella insurance. And this type of policy has a minimum proceeds payout of $1 million. And it could be higher depending on what risk that the individual or business wants to cover.